Thank you. Uh, that is fascinating the way you took the strands apart and explained in great details. Let me start with one question which I have right here on my chat board. This is by a scholar from the Central University of Kerala, Muhammad Nuruddin, who's asking whether how do you evaluate the American withdrawal from the grounds? Will that reflect the future of the Syrian conflict and resurgence of ISIS? And what possible transition do you see in Syria?
Well, to answer the first question, as I mentioned, both President Obama and President Trump have taken a very low key as far as the US involvement is concerned. Their main concentration initially, basically, their main concentration has been that they will stop the use of chemical weapons, and if it is used, they will take action. Obama had drawn that as a red line. Although Assad crossed that line, Obama in the end did nothing. But that was not the same as far as Trump was concerned. He actually had 2 attacks on Syria after the use of chemical weapons. But that's all there is. The other aspect of the US involvement was the ISIS. Now, the US initially had the goals that we'll get rid of Assad. So there have basically been all through these years, except in the last few years when it's sort of become pretty much clear that people don't mind having Assad around for some time. But ISIS was the other goal. So the US kept fighting against ISIS, and that was really helpful to get them off the ground at least. So that is now what will the next Mr. Biden or President Biden do? Well, I think that his instinct should be to continue to get US out of all these long-term commitments. Some of them in Afghanistan are going on for almost 20 years. So I don't think that there's going to be a major change in this matter. I also believe that US, that is really up to Russia to see how it can do it, that the US will have to be an important guarantor as well as a funder of money to rebuild the country. Now, how all this can be orchestrated, I hope Mr. President Biden will be a little more positive on this.
I come in?
Yeah, okay. That's what my reply was.
Okay. Ambassador Singh?
Good afternoon, sir. Good to...
Oh, good afternoon. How are you, Sanjay?
And congratulations on your book.
Thank you.
I was just wondering that, for some time I've been wondering that Russia and Turkey seem to be liking their tango together. And now they have extended their tangoing to Libya and then to Azerbaijan and so on and so forth. And sometimes they also tango in the Caucasus.
Yeah.
And with a change in the US administration, they will also be tangoing with the new US administration. So how much of a difference will their new US administration and a new emphasis on allies and NATO in Europe make to the Russian-Turkish tango? The second question, which I just add on to this, is you said that US will have to be involved for a solution in Syria. Now, the basic position that US and the West has taken is that they cannot get involved till President Assad leaves the scene. Now, how do you square this circle? Because they are very clear that they will not deal with President Assad.
Right. So as far as the Russian-Turkish tango is concerned, they are not always on the same side, as you know, in Libya, and they happen to be uh, conveniently on the same side in Syria, mainly because of the Astana process, where you had Iran, Turkey, and Russia, and there have been a lot of problems between them, including when the Turks shot down the Russian aircraft, and then things became a little better. So the relationship is not a stable relationship. It will continue to change depending on who goes where. So I can't predict, but they will continue in that group, the Asana group, so long as the Syrian situation remains. Um, because again, on this Afrin and Idlib, the two provinces that where Turkey is there, it's the Russian army which is supporting the Syrian army to finally get it. Because the Idlib situation is going on since September 18, and we are now reaching the end of 20, and still there is no sign of any. Because basically, what the Turks did was they hoodwinked these guys. There is a major terrorist group which controls Idlib, and the Turks said we'll get them out into the cordon sanitaire that they have made around Idlib. They did nothing of the kind, but they're supporting it, and many of them have been actually taken to Istanbul, and they're being nurtured there because Mr. Erdogan is trying to keep them as in reserve in case he needs to shove them here or there. So I don't see that the major change will take place in Syria. Now, they will continue to find their interest. I mean, I think in Libya, they'll remain on opposite sides because Turkey has its own goals of trying to get oil concessions from the Libyans. Russia has its own goals. So it's nice that these countries have no fixed enemies and no fixed friends. As far as the whole business of Assad and the money is concerned, there are now enough statements that I've seen, they are in the book, from all the Western allies saying that we are prepared to stick with Assad because they don't know who's going to take his place. So the real issue then is a bargain, and that is the only thing left for the Western countries, unless they want to start backing the various small groups again after 10 more years. But if that they have exhausted whatever they hope to achieve, I think that the bargain is there, that you give the money and you work out with Assad a deal where slowly he's eased out. You have a constitutional structure where Assad remains a president, let's say, for 5 years. And there's a whole schema there in the book. And but then you make him a president who is not an executive president like at present. You have a prime ministerial thing, and you ensure that he has no power to do certain things, that he does everything now. So this is going to be a tough bargain, but I think most of these countries are ready for it, mainly because they realize that you can't keep on hammering away at this country and these people for 10 years without any support. And the international situation is equally troublesome because nothing, I mean, it is true that the international system is in a certain churn, and everyone is actually looking at hedging their bets. So the name of the game today is, if your neighbor's neighbor is your friend, see what you can do with his neighbor's neighbor so that you have an assurance, because that's the only thing left for you to. The system is not in a position to support a country, mainly because we've seen what the Security Council has been made into. So,
Thank you. Mudassar, you have a question. Why don't you ask?
Thank you, sir. I think that was a fascinating, presentation and exposition on the current situation in Syria. I just wanted to ask about the role of Iran, and how do you see the role? I mean, Iranian, intervention panning out. Will the Iranian military continue in Syria, or will there be a sign of some, in the next 5 years or something like that, withdrawal, because that is also one of the reasons why there is a lot of fireworks going on in Syria, because Israel always feels that Iranian military presence is a problem, national security problem for them. And secondly, I also wanted to maybe ask you about the Kurdish situation, the Kurds, the Syrian Kurds, who have been demanding a separate entity in Syria in the northeast Syrian region. Will they eventually accept Assad as the president?
Yes. Okay. Now, first, as far as Iran is concerned, Melissa, the thing is that Iran has invested very heavily in Syria, in money and in people. Plus, as you know, the Qasem Soleimani, who was killed in the drone attack by the Americans, was actually working out how they could, in fact, stay on in Syria. But that doesn't mean because he's died that it's just interrupted. But the Iranians are not going to leave. Now, the fact of the one thing that you need to remember is that the relationship between Iran and Syria is a very old one. Although Iran is a theocratic state, I would say, and Syria has been a secular state, but they have found a tremendous common identity, first in their problems with the US and all that, and second, because the Syrians have been equally wedded to that to what the Hezbollah is doing vis-a-vis Israel in that little part that remains, in their view, undetermined. Although the UN says the border is clear, but nevertheless, so this has been a very important factor in Iran remaining there. Iran also appears to have, as I mentioned briefly, an idea that they should have a presence actually literally opposite the Golan on the Syrian side to further provoke, I suppose, Israel. So that is why you find constantly the Israelis bombing Iranian locations within Syria. And this will continue. So this battle will continue. In the process, the Syrians also get hit. But now, how does Iran leave? I don't think they have any immediate plan to leave, because they have put in vast amounts of resources. But what has happened is that the Russians have acquired a tremendous, call it power or tremendous leverage over Iran to ensure that they can stop them when they don't want them. It is really due to the Russian actions, and Russians telling the Iranians that they have not been able to move anywhere nearer the Golan in Syria. It is entirely because the Russians have, in a way, been, I can't say protecting the Israelis, but they've been trying to also keep some things going there as well with Israel. So you have this peculiar situation where Syria is like, Russia is like the Kotwal, and he's saying kahan danda marna hai, kahan jaane dena hai, kab jaane dena hai, kab chhodna hai, kab rukna hai. So this is how, and frankly, Bashar Assad is very happy with this state of affairs, because the Iranians are, he realized that the Iranian, at one time in 2015, 2016, the Syrian army had completely come down in a very bad way. And it was the Iranians who actually helped to recruit new people, train them. All that was done by the Iranians. But with the result, there is a certain indoctrination that takes place. And that has been a big bugbear as far as the Alawites and therefore the regime is concerned. So there is that angle which is being, and that's why Assad has been pretty happy that the Syrians are controlling the Iranians. And I think that situation will continue for some time. Even Russia, on its part, doesn't look like it's in a great hurry to leave, except that as far as Putin is concerned, there is a very strong pressure on him internally to get out of Syria, because he's being told, what are you gaining out of this? Especially after certain Russian soldiers were killed in a US attack, US air attack in Syria. So this is what the situation is. And what was your second question?
That was on the Kurds, Syrian Kurds.
Kurdish. Okay, now the Kurdish, of course, are, the first thing was that President Trump, other than ISIS and chemical attacks, the third leg of the US presence in the last 5 years has been to protect the Kurds. Now with us, Trump saying that he's getting out the US forces, he's left the Kurds high and dry. Now the Kurds have presently, now the point is that the Kurds are under attack by the Turks, who are in that area of Idlib and Afrin. I mean, Afrin was a largely Kurdish area. So it is, that is one of the reasons why the Turks have gone there. Now, the issue is that what happens with the Kurds? The Kurds are doing two things at this time. One is that the Syrian army, when they found that the Turks were attacking the Kurds, the Syrian army said, we'll help you. So there has been action with the Syrian army and the Kurds on one side and the Turkish army on the other. The second thing is that in any future settlement in Syria, and that is also what I've written, the Kurds will have to be given a certain autonomy within the border of Syria. There is no question about it. It will have to happen. Otherwise, it won't work. I hope I've answered your questions.
Thank you, sir. Certainly.
Professor Tanaka, did you want to ask him something?
Certainly. Thank you, Ambassador, for your very comprehensive lecture and your views on Syria. One thing that came to mind was that you seem to suggest that there may be some sort of a amicable solution to the conflict, I mean, the civil war. Maybe the Russians persuading Bashar al-Assad to leave office after some sort of a consideration that he will temporarily stay in office, or even given some sort of a say nominal position to lead the government. But at the same time, I wonder what the Russians themselves and also a country like Iran would think about it, because for Iran, the way that they have vested their interest in Syria was not because of Bashar al-Assad himself or the Syrians. It was more about how to supply Hezbollah in Lebanon. And Syria had always been the corridor for the Iranians to supply Hezbollah. So unless there are some guarantees for the Iranians that the future government or whoever has control over the Syrian government will be like-minded like Bashar al-Assad, so that they would provide that sort of a safe passage to the for the supply line for Hezbollah. Likewise, for the Russians, they would like to, I think that they would like to maintain their presence in the air base and also the usage of Tal-2 port. So again, there seems to be a contradiction. If there would be some sort of a pro-West government to be instated in Damascus, that would run contrary to the Russian interest. How would you think that?
Thank you very much. Very interesting questions. The first thing is, of course, as far as Russians are concerned, there's no doubt they would like to keep the Tartus port and they would like to keep the Hamaim air base. I believe that that will be a decision that will have to be taken by whatever the Syrian government is there that comes in eventually. But I think they'll be able to manage that, I feel. As far as Iran is concerned, I know that their long-term interest is to ensure that the conduit to the Hezbollah remains open. It has remained open, and I frankly don't doubt it, because whoever is the president of Syria, the Syria has always shared Lebanon in the sense the Hezbollah's view that the 1965 line, I think, has to be the international border and not what the UN. The UN has declared that there is nothing ambiguous about the border between Lebanon and Israel. But there is that small part. The reason why it is there is that it is a tremendous collection of water, and water is the name of the game as far as that entire area is concerned. So I think that whoever is the president of Iraq, he will not object to this, to what they've been doing. But then now we come to the next question, or your first question, which is how does it all work? I mean, what happens? Especially, will the different countries agree? As I said, that the model I could find was the agreement on Cyprus. A similar agreement can be, in the case of Cyprus, it's called the 1960 Treaty of Guarantee on Cyprus. Similarly, if you have a treaty on guarantee with all the P5 guaranteeing the agreement, the structure in Syria. Now, what should that structure have, or what will it depend on? There are a few things. That first thing is that, of course, apart from the humanitarian aid and reconstruction of the country, what one needs is a viable political system, which means it needs a constitution. What kind of a constitution it should have? It's not that Syria has not had any constitutions in the past. There are constitutions of 1950 and 2012. But I think other relevant constitutions are the Turkish Constitution of 1982 and the Egyptian Constitution of 2014. Secondly, as I mentioned, the Sunnis are in the majority in Syria. They will need a guarantee in the constitution so that they're accepted as the majority community. Then what it needs is a multi-party system which will include the Arab Baath Socialist Party. You don't throw it out, or you don't do de-Baathification. You just have other parties as well, and when you vote. Now, election would be on the lines that election takes place in Turkey, which is each party has to get a minimum percentage of votes to have seats in parliament. In Turkey, I think it's quite high, but whatever they
10%, I believe.
Yeah, and then I think that what needs, because of the tremendous, basically Syria is a country of minorities. I mean, you find every minority from the Yazidis to the Shias of other kinds, and then you have the Christians. So there is a concept of consociational democracy, which allows different people to stay and allow the passions to cool. It's only afterwards that you can have a broad-based system. Now, Syria remains the only country who has at least a kind of a secular constitution. All others in the region have turned Islamic. So if that is worth keeping, that needs to be incorporated to keep the religious authority completely divorced from the political authority. It needs the reform of the legal system. Then it needs constitutional guarantee for all minorities, both Islamic and non-Islamic, and a special status will need to be recognized for the Alawites, because the Alawites' greatest fear is that if the Assad regime leaves, or if there is no Alawite at the head, those guys are going to get massacred. I mean, in my own visits, people have told me that, brother, we are going to get massacred. For us, it's a matter of life and death. So something needs to be done if this thing has to be. And then, of course, you need confidence building measures to have people. So these are minimum things. The reform of the police and intelligence service, all this, these are the main sort of 10 odd points that we need to have when you think of what kind of a constitution, what should a new citizen constitution have. So I think that is where it is for the moment. But to get there, we first need a durable ceasefire.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you.
Thanks. I just want to check with Kumar. Do we have a few more minutes because there's some more questions in the chat box?
Yes, please, because we started a little late.
Okay.
Thanks.
So, okay. So I'm asking on behalf of Alvite, who has some noise issues. So he wants me to ask. He's saying, does your book cover the aspects of the economic reconstruction, which has, often been discussed, and how far is India interested in playing a role in this process, or is New Delhi's interest on Syria limited, and they prefer to work case by case, issue by case, and basically India's role there on the economic reconstruction also.
Can you just repeat the last part of your question?
What about India's interest in Syria? Is it limited on on a case wise or issue wise, or is it part of the larger economic reconstruction that's taking place there?
Okay.
Or the plans for it rather.
Let me take India's interest. India's interest has been, we have always been friendly with Syria. We have not been, we have not taken, in 2012, I mean, in that period, 12-13, I think we were members of the Security Council. At that time, we took a decision on the Syrian thing, knowing that we did not count that they would probably get vetoed by Russia or something. But anyway, we showed where we stood. So I have to say that India has been very positive as far as Syria is concerned. And I checked that there is, of course, this coronavirus in Syria as well, but not in the way that we have it here. But nevertheless, we seem to have sent some material for in terms of masks and this, that, and the other, ventilators to Syria. So we are keeping very faithful to our basic position always. We have not made any sort of statement on Syria, as far as I can see in the recent past, but we have been well disposed towards Syria, and the Syrians see us as their friend. We have neither tried to meddle to see whether we could be some kind of peacemakers there. The time has not yet come. If it does come, I don't know whether our Prime Minister would be interested in getting involved in that. That's my view at the present moment as far as India is concerned. As far as what's the first part of the question?
Your book has covered those aspects of the discussion regarding the economic reconstruction, which is
yes, it
planned.
has. There is quite a lot about the economic consequences of the Syrian war and what will need to be done as in order to retrieve some of the things. There are cities there which are completely finished, and small villages you can't even understand where it was. Even Homs and Hama and all these places have been. So it's going to need a lot of money, and I have to say that what has happened, and it's quite interesting, that since the last year, there are projects for reconstruction, projects for construction of other infrastructure, where the Chinese have entered Syria to say that they are prepared to put money in there. So there is that. And surprisingly, the Damascus Trade Fair has started, and the last one had a huge pavilion of the Chinese, basically focused on that, Russians, because now or most of these countries are sensing that it's sooner rather than later that this conflict will end. And this is where we are going to start making money, because money is going to be available. So this is where it is.
Okay, so I don't know whether she can hear me, but she wants to understand the impact of the Caesar Civilian Protection Act on the Assad government, and whether that will help fasten or delay the resolution of the conflict.
Of the Caesar Act?
Yeah, impact of the Caesar Act.
I think the Caesar Act is going to be very negative for Syria, because it is going to prevent much aid being given to Syria by other countries. And that is going to be a very negative development from the Syrian point of view. but therefore it cannot, you cannot say that it will necessarily lead to peace unless there is some determined effort to link the relaxation of the Caesar Act with uh, stopping the conflict. Now, to do that, again, you need the same Security Council members who are on the ground there. So there you have it. It's like a double jeopardy.
That's a tough one. Anybody else here?
Um, can I, if nobody is there?
Yes.
Please come.
Ambassador, and you are given a reasonably positive picture about Assad in control of vast parts of the country, and given the cost and everything. But can you say for sure that Syria, as we know, since the end of the Second World War, are we going to return to that, or are you going to have a much weaker country, or even on the verge of internal division and partition?
Well, Syria is quite a unique country in the sense that, I mean, it's in Arabic, of course, it's called Bilad al-Sham, which covers the entire area, includes Lebanon also, and includes part of Jordan, which are not part of Syria anymore. But basically, Syria has a long history of being able to look at, being able to bring different streams of thought and of people to its own land to settle their issues. I mean, so that's why it is a pivotal state. It remains a pivotal state even today, because what happens in Syria today is going to have a major impact on the rest of the world and on the international system as it is. So there I would say that the idea of a pivotal state was first, you probably heard of Halford Mackinder, who talked about it in imperialistic terms. And during the Cold War, the Western countries looked at a pivotal state, which was one which, if you did not have with you, it would turn the entire neighborhood into a communist. And then you have the one after the, in today's date, which is that a country which has the wherewithal to have an independent foreign policy. And sure enough, Syria has had an independent foreign policy. As you know, Syria has always called itself the bleeding heart of the Arab world. Because it was a hard country. It was a small country, hard country in terms of its views on the Arab situation, on the Palestine situation, and how it could be healed. Unfortunately, the whole world has passed Syria by, and as far as that is concerned, considering now we have the UAE and Saudi Arabia in bed with Israel. So the world has changed, but Syria still remains a very committed country, if I can call it that. And that it will probably eventually, its foreign policy will have to become more realistic, because now it looks like it is unrealistic. It stands because the Baath Socialist Party was only found in Syria and Iraq, and it had three, this thing: Wahida, Ishtakia, and Hurriya. There is liberty, unity, and socialism. Now there is no socialism. So there are many things that, but Syria still continues to maintain a kind of independent foreign policy, and I don't know whether that completely answers your question, or have I missed out something.
Kumar, you happy with your response? He's asking.
That's okay.
Okay. Anybody else who wants to come in at this point? You know, for all these years of being associated with think tanks who work on the Middle East, I find that space really, very mind-boggling. But Syria, of course, was the worst for me. I mean, a quagmire, I could never understand or even could relate to. But you really kind of, with such clarity, kind of broke it into pieces, which for somebody who doesn't look at the region can at least have a bit of a glimpse of what is happening. And you also concluded on an upbeat mood, which usually when we've heard conversations about Middle East or Syria, it's always a very kind of a downturn process that one discusses. But I'm sure your book's going to be of great interest to everyone here. So.